Welcome to today's webinar, everyone. Advancing Basic Income, Stories and Strategies for Policy Change. This webinar is brought to you by Tamarack Institute's Communities Ending Poverty. We're a network of poverty reduction collaboratives in 90 communities seeking to end poverty locally. My name is Natasha Pei, and I'm the Director of Communities Ending Poverty.
And hi, everyone. My name is Orpah Cundangan. I'm the Learning Lead for Communities Ending Poverty as well. So to begin, I'd like to start with acknowledgement and gratitude for the Indigenous people who cared for and are still caring for this land. I see there are so many of us who have joined today calling in from across Turtle Island, and no matter where we may be situated, we are on Indigenous land. So we would like to just ground our webinar today in gratefulness that we can meet. For those of us who are settlers, it is our job to commit to learning about the history, the promises, and the challenges that have been laid out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I am calling in from Toronto, known as Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I would also like to acknowledge those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. And as we begin, I'd like to invite everyone here to take a moment to yourself and silently acknowledge the land where you're situated today, or think about a personal reflection on your commitment to truth and reconciliation in Canada and towards dismantling systemic anti-Black racism. And if we can advance the slides here, I'll just have Natasha introduce our speakers for today.
All right, so Orpah and I are your co-hosts for today, and I have the pleasure of introducing four amazing basic income advocates who are advancing basic income across Canada. So we have with us Sheila. Sheila is a founding member of Basic Income Canada Network, its chair since 2014, and former executive director of the National Council of Welfare. She was on the National Advisory Committee of the federal Tackling Poverty Together project and is co-author with Chandra Pasma of Basic Income: Some Policy Options for Canada. Her Basic Income Canada network work has included co-organizing North American and international congresses, the Green Resilience Project, the Signpost to Success Survey of Ontario Pilot recipients, and the Canadian Big Forum in 2024. She is a recipient of the Dr. John Rook Leadership Award for Poverty Reduction from the Canadian Poverty Institute. And she was also a volunteer working to build her former public service career in income security policy and federal, provincial, territorial relations. Tracy, also with us, is a professor and the Canada Research Chair in Advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals in the School of Humanitarian Studies at Royal Roads University in Victoria, BC. Tracy's program of research touches upon many different fields of the social policy arena, including access to income and food security, social assistance, health equity, basic income, and climate justice. Tracy is an adjunct professor at the Arthur Labatt Family School of Nursing at Western University, a research affiliate at the Center for Human Rights Research at the University of Manitoba, chair of the National Strategic Planning Committee for a Basic Income Guarantee, and the editor of the Taylor and Francis journal, Critical Policy Studies. Josh is the CEO of Food First Newfoundland and Labrador, a provincial nonprofit organization that works with communities in Newfoundland and Labrador to ensure everyone has access to affordable, healthy, and culturally appropriate food. Passionate about systems change and the power of collective action, Josh has taken the lead role in many coalitions and campaigns. He co-chairs the Provincial Food Security Working Group, the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador, and sat on the province's Health Accord Task Force. Outside of work, Josh sits on many boards and committees and has been heavily engaged in work around civic engagement, local food, and the arts. And finally, Keitha is a project coordinator for the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition. Through the coalition, Keitha engages in policy discussions, community research, community outreach, research, and public advocacy. Her work emphasizes collaboration, education, and advocacy, and promotes equitable access to housing, services, and human rights. In addition to her work with the coalition, she was passionate about community passionate. She is a passionate community arts educator, founding fiddle programs in several rural northern communities and administering the Artist in School program from 2018 to 2023. She holds a Master's of Education and a Bachelor of Journalism degree and is honored to work, live, and play with her two teenage sons on the traditional territory of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and the Tahan Quechin Council. So I'm going to hand it over. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Orpah, you can lead us off in our discussion.
Thanks, Natasha. I'm actually going to pass it over to Tracy. Tracy and Sheila are going to provide us with an overview of what a basic income guarantee is. And they're going to share some strategies as well to advance basic income based on learnings from the recently released Basic Income Guarantee Forum report, which I'll link in the chat as well. I'll turn it over to you, Tracy.
Great. Thank you so much, Orpah. There we go. What is a basic income? So I'll be referring to basic income guarantee, or a BIG, which is a regular, reliable payment made by the government to individuals. It's meant to provide an income floor beneath which no one should fall, and it uses the tax system, so there's no stigma in its receipt. It's associated with a number of principles. You'll see them there: adequacy, autonomy, dignity, equality of opportunity, non-conditionality, and universality of access. Now, it's important to highlight the bottom one specifically because a basic income guarantee is different than a universal basic income. A universal basic income, or UBI, is a demo-grant approach to a basic income that's being advocated in the United States and elsewhere in terms of ensuring everybody has a basic income payment, and it's the same payment for everybody. But Canadian advocates have been suggesting that basic income, through a basic income guarantee, provide a basic income to people who need it. So universality of access is for those who need it. As an income supplement mechanism, as opposed to a universal basic income for everybody. Sorry, it's delayed when I do the slides. Lovely. So in terms of setting up the context, why do we need a basic income? As you can see from some of these graphs, poverty was actually on the decline for almost a decade, until about 2020, largely because significant changes were made to the Canada Child Benefit to make it into a basic income for families. So since 2020, and the cost of living crisis and inflation really started to pick up, we've seen obviously a rise in poverty, and specifically deep income poverty. So people that are living on less than 75% of the poverty line, the market basket measure. So in 2022, 5% of Canadians were living on less than 75% of the poverty line, which is up from 3.6% in 2021. And obviously that's still continuing to grow. There's a bit of a delay with data, but we know it's going up. We also know that racialized groups are the most impoverished. So some recent work being done with Campaign 2000, this one specifically in Toronto, to look at the different groups that are most impacted by poverty. And yet, not just people living in poverty, the impact of not having financial security is impacting pretty much everybody. So we know that about 75% of Canadians, this was a poll that was done by the Financial Resiliency Institute, found that 3/4 of us are feeling the stress of financial vulnerability. So this is not just a poverty issue. The mental health impacts have broad sweeping effects on people across the income spectrum. And we also know that charity won't cut it. We need a basic income now because charitable programs are working beyond capacity. They've seen over a 90% increase in the number of visits from 2019 to 2024, with an estimated 1 in 4 living in poverty. We know that charitable programs have wonderful benefits. They're doing great work, but they actually don't do anything about the root of financial hardship. Nobody gets out of poverty by using a charitable program. We need policy decisions that are actually going to change people's financial security status. And the thing of it is it's actually very affordable. Recent estimates have just been released by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, showing that we could reduce or actually cut poverty in half, or almost in half, 40% in Canada. And by using a different administrative unit than in previous cost estimates, could almost cut the cost of a basic income in half. So it is affordable, and we now know that it can have significant impacts, particularly for people at the deep poverty income scale. So let's think about some strategies to advance big. First of all, I think it's really important to have a real mass of society that shows solidarity for a basic income guarantee. One way that we could do that is to really advocate for the basic income that we want. And under Sid Frankel's leadership, the Basic Income Forum Group was able to put together a consensus statement that basically identifies the basic income that folks in Canada are really advocating for. So we're really hoping for folks to be able to sign on and endorse the consensus statement. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But yeah, we need to show that we have a groundswell of society that's supporting greater income security. So this basic income consensus statement is actually going to be added to we're going to revitalize or repurpose the Basic Income Forum website. So the website that was used for the big forum conference that was held in May, and you can see the link there. We're going to repurpose this website and make it a central hub for all things basic income. So we're going to have web pages that are going to be about events that are happening, social media posts, a section for the consensus statement and how people can sign on and endorse that. So this will happen in the next couple of weeks. So if you go on there right now, you might not see all the materials there. You will see, however, the basic income report from the forum, which Sheila is going to talk about in a moment. And so, yes, another strategy is to be coalition building across sectors. We actually know that there's a lot of people in Canada that are in support of a basic income. We need to be able to find those people and make sure that they're part of this group, again, to show that solidarity and to show that there is a movement in Canada that really would like to see better income security through a basic income. So that's what we did. We brought, with the Basic Income Forum in May, we held in Ottawa. You'll see the reports there in both English and in French. Leading up to that conference was actually a high school contest, which was run through all Metroland newspapers in Ontario to ask young people from high school to write, why they thought that a basic income is important. And then we were able to present the prize winner at the conference. And we saw advocates gathered from across Canada and actually from beyond internationally that came. And I won't speak too much to it because I'm going to leave that for Sheila to talk about some of the themes from that. Also, I think it's really important to have a multi-pronged approach to our advocacy. And so doing lobbying, campaigns, and rallying, we already have some experience with the Basic Income Now campaign that got a lot of press and was well recognized. There's letter writing campaigns that are happening right now. Coalition Canada has got one on Coalition Canada Basic Income website that you can also go on and endorse. And things that came out of the Basic Income Forum conference, the putting food banks out of business campaign that was inspired through conversations at that Basic Income Forum conference. We also need to continue expanding the literature base and the research on basic income. So doing more research, doing policy briefs, collaborating together. It was a collaboration actually that was able to get a Social Sciences Humanities Research Council Connections grant to help put on the big forum. We need to continue to do it, to do collaborative work together to build the evidence base and to help build these kinds of projects and programs. One example of some research that just came out actually last month, Elaine Power and I have just published a paper on the experiences of folks on the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, talking about the significant harm that was done when the Premier, Doug Ford, decided to cancel the pilot prematurely, and what that did to participants' social determinants of mental health, that people had really been planning for their future lives. They had, planning to take on future education and new job opportunities and, move into better housing arrangements. And all of that was thrown into chaos because of the decision to cancel the pilot. We need to continue building education and raising awareness about basic income, particularly taking opportunities to engage young people, getting out the word through webinars like this, through podcasts. The zine that was put out by the Basic Income Youth Collective is a great resource as well. The high school contest that we did for the big forum is another example. Also, getting the word out through media and social media campaigns, writing op-eds, editorials, and social media posts. We actually do have a social media campaign that we're hoping to release in the next couple of weeks, largely around the consensus statement and trying to get people to get on and endorse the statement. So that will be coming soon to a social media feed near you, so look out for that. And then continuing to work on leveraging the demonstration projects, trying to lay the groundwork for implementation. Some might argue now this policy innovation has been experimented with all around the world. We have reams of evidence on it. So how can we leverage this evidence to now say, how do we implement this in Canada? The PEI project was a great example of this work, and actually the work that was done to prepare for the PEI report to try and get a demonstration in PEI was super helpful in laying the groundwork for the parliamentary budget officer's work in terms of recognizing that if you change the administrative unit of where you direct the basic income to, you can accrue huge amount of cost savings. So kudos to the PEI project team for being able to work through some of those details. And then trying to continue doing strategic advocacy to targeted audiences. Obviously, we want to get a basic income on the party platforms of all of the federal leaders. We also want to have targeted conversations with folks that will be like less inclined to, endorse a basic income, but maybe you can talk through some of the existing forms of basic income to say we really need to bolster the Canada Child Benefit. We need to increase the guaranteed income supplement for older adults. We need to increase the Canada Disability Benefit, while also then convincing them of the transformative potential of having a basic income. And I know that a lot of work has already been done in terms of the Canada Disability Benefit. Big affiliated groups have submitted policy briefs. Our group did as well to Employment and Social Development Canada to really say you need to make this form of a basic income for persons with disabilities adequate and robust. So given the ambiguous nature of policy change work, it's really a chaotic process trying to change policy. We don't really know what will be the most influential thing. What is the most impactful tool? Some things we think are going to be the most impactful, tend to not go anywhere, and the things that we kind of like don't pay any attention to, we're like, whoo. So I think it's really important just to be persistent and to use that multi-pronged approach. Obviously, having a large mass of people standing together to endorse a basic income, I think, is really where we need to be to really push this basic income movement forward. So this is where going on to the forum website and signing on the consensus statement. Again, it'll be hopefully up in the next 2 weeks for you to be able to endorse, to really say you're behind this and we're moving this forward. Thank you. So see if I can.
Okay, Tracy's going to try to go back to number 14, I think it is, Tracy.
Yep.
And now you just get to listen to me talk. But I have no slides. But that last bit that Tracy just mentioned just really highlighted something for me, that in one of the really important policy issues that I was working on when I was in government, the thing that really changed things was the parliamentary secretary to the finance minister putting his foot in his mouth publicly, and we were ready. So, you know, Tracy's right. You never quite know what's going to make the difference. So I'm going to talk about the themes. I want to spend just 1 minute. I mean, I can't help talking about the greatness of this forum. I mean, partly it was just like we were mostly in person, and after COVID and everything, it was so wonderful. But this was such a collaborative effort. It's unbelievable. I mean, the diversity in this movement has been a challenge, and it was hugely reflected at this conference. The speakers certainly, because that was intentional. We planned that, but the participants as well. I mean, there were so many sectors represented. We had perspectives from federal, provincial, territorial, municipal governments, from Indigenous leadership. You know, Newfoundland, Labrador, and Yukon were part of the program. So, and then the other really key thing for us, because we've struggled to get support for this, Tracy mentioned the SHIRT grant. We tried to get one before and it didn't work. This time, we not only got SHIRT, we got support from 3 universities, faith and justice organizations, and 2 unions, including the Public Service Alliance of Canada. So that kind of relationship building to get those sponsors was huge. The positive energy is, it's hard to describe unless you were there. As one of the organizers looking at everything behind the scenes, I mean, as always, there were times when things can go wrong. You know, every time anything looked like it might be an issue, there were 4 people there to help immediately, whether it had anything to do with your job or not. And that, to me, that really reflected not just the best of what we're all doing, but the best of how we work together. I think that was quite amazing. So when we pulled out the evaluations and we looked at all of the things that happened throughout the forum 3 days, there were overarching themes that came out over and over again. I'm going to focus on one more than the others, but I'll start with just the energy and hope in positive, feasible solutions. So this was one of the things that came out so clearly, that people are tired of complaining about things, tired of describing the problem. We have the solution. We are working for something. And that's really empowering. So that was great. The other thing that came out was clearly we need this now more than ever. And this thing was held before we had, you know, all of the major sovereignty and other problems that we're having with our neighbors to the south. So the work is hard, but the energy and the motivation, I think, amongst people is still really strong. Tracy talked about the evidence. I am not going to talk about this. There is just so much. It is unbelievable. And if anybody says, no, we don't have quite enough, they're wrong. So what we're working on now is looking at kind of the power of ideology and path dependency. Fear and apathy is really psychologically strong. People don't want to see the evidence for various reasons. So, I mean, it's just something we're thinking about as we're looking at strategic directions going forward. And one of the things BICN is doing is change leadership training that's built on storytelling, that's public narrative, that links my story with a story of us and people out there who experience similar things that people can relate to, and then the story of now and what we really need to do at this point in time. So that's something that I think is really, even Jim Stanford during a podcast, a political podcast a while ago. So Jim Stanford is like the premier labor economist in Canada. And he said, yeah, I'm stopping charts. I'm telling stories. That's, it's come to that. Anyway, so the one that I want to spend most time on, though, is the third one, that Canada has a unique set of building blocks. Lots of people know this. When a few of us went to the Basic Income Earth Network Conference, the international one that was held in Bath this year, the approach from most of the people, they would come up to us and they would say, why on earth have you not done this by now? Because we've got so much going for us. So I'm going to run through just a very brief list of some of these things that we've got going for us. So going back a ways, the real foundation, we've got unconditional income programs for seniors and kids that have been running for years. We've got Mincome that nobody really knew much about for a while until Evelyn Forget pulled out the boxes and told us in around 2011 what happened. Also during that period of time, there's been a consistent growth in the use of GST credits and other kinds of tax credits to do social policy type things. In the last decade, however, this issue has exploded. When we started, nobody even knew what we were talking about. And now we've got, again, brief list. The Ontario Basic Income Pilot was, the planning for that started in 2015. It ran, it got canceled, but the research continues. And the people who were part of that program still live with us. They have voices and that can't be silenced. That can't be undone. In 2018, just as the Ontario pilot was underway, we did the very first work in Canada really modeling what a national basic income would look like. So we took Ontario, we thought, okay, if we really wanted to set the bar, what might it look like? So we developed some of those options. The Parliamentary Budget Office was really helpful to us in that process. So we've had a relationship with them all along. Then we got a pandemic. We actually got the pandemic about 3 weeks before Policy Options was released. And one of its first casualties, people affected, was my co-author of the report, who picked up COVID at her children's bus stop in Ottawa. Anyway, so we had the pandemic, then we had CERB. Clearly, CERB was not a basic income, but it offers a huge learning opportunity in how we can do things, how we can do them fast when we need to, about how things aren't quite as complicated. When the need is there, they can be done. Huge. The Green Resilience Project is a sort of different layer of things. It looks at bringing communities together and bringing different sectors and communities together to look at how environmental issues linked to health issues, linked to income issues, and that sort of thing. And those were done across the country in all kinds of different communities. Again, that learning is amazing. Provinces and territories have taken their own steps. You're going to hear about Keitha's research work in the Yukon. You're going to hear about Josh's about developments to establish actual basic income programs in Newfoundland and Labrador. There were civil society groups in the Northwest Territories who've commissioned reports. They've had a little less luck with their government. And as Tracy mentioned, PEI built on this earlier modeling. And that shows, again, that we have options, that we really can do this. Lots of municipalities have called for things for basic income. bills in the House, the CCPA, you tell me I have 1 more minute. Okay. CCPA alternative budget, the disability benefit, all of these things. The new parliamentary budget report is really, really interesting because, as Tracy mentioned, it shows we can afford this, but it too has design problems that we need to work on. It really does a great job for those in deepest poverty, but the people paying for it are not doing much better. We need to change that so the people who can afford it are helping address the problem. Just to close, I mean, we've accomplished so much. We've got all of these different ways and things that are contributing. Josh is going to talk about Newfoundland and Labrador, and he's going to emphasize the last major theme, which is that synergies are a better value than silos. We heard this from everybody that was there. Tackling really large problems, one issue at a time, is simply not going to cut it. But across all of these, income really is a common denominator. So, you know, we want grocery rebates, we want housing rebates. Really, we just need to give people money. They can figure out what to do with it best. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sheila and Tracy. It's so helpful, I think, to go through the building blocks that we have to work on here in the Canadian context, the many different strategies that we have in a really practical sense. And so now we move over to Josh out in Newfoundland and Labrador. You're actually doing this. You're trying to take all the kind of like the chaotic environment and all the different strategies and put that into practice. And so we'd love to hear about, what that looks like, how the movement has been progressing in Newfoundland and Labrador. And then just really briefly, like you come from a food background, you run the Food First Newfoundland Food Center. You're part of the close the doors to the food banks movement. So why basic income from a food perspective? What would you say to other food groups or organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. That's a great place to start. And Sheila, you teed that one up pretty well, because I think there's probably other food groups on the food organizations on this call. I think, like, we all know that food insecurity is primarily an income problem, right? And that for our team at Food First NL, so we're a food systems organization. We're working at this kind of at the systems level, trying to connect food organizations to each other, to do advocacy work around the things that need to change in the policy space around food. And it was pretty simple for us to come around to basic income, I'll be honest. I think by and large, it was us asking ourselves the questions of what would be the single policy change that would have the most impact on the thing that we're trying to solve for, right? And it is obviously basic income. Not to say that there are not other dynamics to food insecurity or to the right to food and to people having access to the foods that make sense to them in their cultural and family lives. But it's hard to imagine any of that working without adequate income first. And I think for us as well as an organization, I'm sure this is true for lots of other people on this call, we think a lot about dignity, right? It's part of our vision statement at Food First NL is a Newfoundland and Labrador where everyone can eat with joy and dignity. And I think we have a lot of intersection and interaction with the ways in which people who are food insecure, who are primarily folks who are low income, are deprived of dignity by the support systems that they're connecting with, right? I mean, I'm sure there are folks on this call who probably do have some lived experience of this. Accessing food banks, for example, is not often a very pleasant process for a lot of people. And that's no slight against the people who run food banks, but the process of reaching out for help with some of these like deeply challenging things in your life is just one that exposes people to a lot of risk. And I think that's the other thing that brought us into this conversation and into the basic income world. So I think it would be useful for me to contextualize a little bit what's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador. We're on the far end of the country. We're a little place. And so sometimes things don't make it out into the big wide world, but there's quite a bit on the go. And I think it does speak to maybe some strategies that a lot of us can think about here. So I'll give you a sense of where we are. One, and Natasha mentioned this when she was introducing me. So I sat on a panel, an expert panel called the Health Accord, where in Newfoundland and Labrador, we face the same challenges that most Canadian healthcare systems face, but just worse. So we have the worst outcomes and the highest per patient spend of any healthcare system in the country, right? So it's a real crisis. And so people were brought together from across the spectrum. So folks from all over the healthcare kind of stakeholder world, the CEOs of the health authorities, the unions, physicians groups, all these kind of things, but also community partners, including my organization, to guide a process of reimagining not just health care, but health. Like, what would get us to a place where people were healthier? Yeah, those are cloudberries in my hand. That's this picture of my hand in southern Labrador, actually, when I found we call them bake apples out here, but that's what they are. So I was very happy bake apple picking that day. Anyhow, the Health Accord process came back and recommended a basic income twice in the final report, for the simple reason that there's no way to achieve what needs to happen in the transformation of our health outcomes without dealing with the social determinants of health, right? And so that, I think when we think about what are the levers on provincial policy, like provinces spend most of their money on health. It's half of the provincial budget. And so if we're not moving the basic income conversation into the health conversation, we're going to lose. And so in Newfoundland, it has really been part of that conversation, and that has been moving things forward because that has a lot of political weight. I'll also mention we have now 3 targeted basic incomes, is what folks call them here. I think we could get into a debate about the degree to which these are or are not basic incomes, but we do have one program for youth exiting care. So when you leave care at age 18, you're provided with a basic income to help you get on your feet as an independent adult. It's a very small group of youth who qualify for this one. Similarly, and some folks actually might have seen a news story about this one this week in the Canadian press or last week. There's a basic income program for near seniors. So we have folks who are on income support, which is our social assistance program, and receiving what's called community supports, which is a healthcare program. So for folks with lots of health vulnerabilities, once you turn 60, you're now offered this basic income pilot that brings you up to what your income will be when you turn 65. Because we know that lots of outcomes for people get better when they turn 65 and have access to what is in effect a basic income, right? So this is only a few hundred people, and I think this one is an interesting one to follow because it's been challenging to enroll people in it. I think there's probably about a third of the people who can be enrolled have been, and so we're following that one closely. The bigger one here, which is rolling out in July, is that the province here is rolling out a provincial disability benefit that will stack on top of the national one. So the national one is $200 a month, which, as we know, is really meager. But our provincial government is stacking $400 more on top of that. And so for the lowest income folks with disabilities, that'll be a 50% increase in their income overnight. It's quite significant. And they're calling it a basic income, which I think all 3 of these we can debate about whether they are, but the language of basic income is there. We also have an all-party committee studying basic income. Sheila has presented to them, I have, and they are finally about to report. They're very late, but we do expect their report to land, and I would expect it to recommend again in favor of basic income. And there's a review of our income support system happening. So lots of things on the go at the same time. The policy environment is pretty fruitful out here. And part of why that's happening is I think Newfoundland and Labrador is a bit of a unique political context for this kind of work. There's a lot of common ground between the 3 dominant political parties here around poverty reduction. So if you look back to the 2010s, this province is the only province in Canada that has actually shown that food insecurity can be decreased at the population level. And that happened during a progressive conservative government who had a really aggressive poverty reduction strategy. And the PCs here still kind of feel like they own poverty reduction. When the new PC leader was elected, I heard him on the radio the morning after he took over the party, going off about how income support needs to be indexed to inflation, right? Like, so this is, I think we do have an unusual political context here. Sheila could probably back me up on this, that if you close your eyes in a meeting of the All-Party Committee on Basic Income, you wouldn't know who the New Democrat and who the Conservative was. And so that does provide a little bit more continuity. And I think that's something we have in common with Prince Edward Island, and why the two provinces have made progress is because it's not that our political parties don't hate each other, but they don't hate each other for this particular reason. And so it allows for a little bit more continuity there. I mentioned it's also really seen as a key part of health transformation now. There's some strong public opinion on this, and I'll take you through a little bit of data on the next slide. This is not a new concept in Newfoundland and Labrador. So when the fishery collapsed, the cod fishery in the early 1990s, which is the single biggest mass unemployment in Canadian history, right? It was just a deeply economically traumatic event here. But it was also a moment at which there was actually a very serious bit of work done on a proposal to implement a basic income. It didn't happen for reasons of politics that I don't have time to get into, but it laid some groundwork, and there are people who were involved in that effort who are still around and whose brains we've been able to pick. I'll show you those data now because I think it is interesting to show you how different Newfoundland and Labrador is. And you don't need to look at all this, but a polling company called the Gandalf Group was contracted by the Maple Leaf Center for Food Security to do some polling on attitudes towards poverty reduction policies and social policy. And they oversampled in Newfoundland and Labrador because the Maple Leaf Center is doing a bunch of work out here, which gave us, for once, a really good local sample in a small province. And I draw your attention, look at how many people support a minimum income floor that would provide a safety net for all Canadians. If you look at Canada at large, it's 40% say it's very desirable, another 34 say somewhat, so you're at 75%. If you go to Newfoundland and Labrador, 55 and 35, so you have 90% of people saying it's either somewhat or very desirable that we have a minimum income floor. So there is a really significant difference in terms of the political will behind these kind of changes. And there's, I think, a more cross-partisan consensus that government has a role to play in this particular way. And this chart's interesting because it shows that that's actually consistently true across most areas of social policy. The last thing I'll just talk about to give people again a little bit of a worked example, then I'll get off the line here, or at least recede into the background a bit, is just what basic income advocacy is looking like right now in Newfoundland and Labrador. Because again, I think it's a little bit different. There might be some lessons to learn. We do have a long-standing tradition of grassroots advocacy, primarily led by faith leaders. So we have an interfaith group that's been at it forever, doing a ton of letter writing, particularly to federal MPs. And then what we see then is a second kind of wave of basic income organizing started happening out of COVID. So a bunch of us started organizing around, probably what a lot of people on this call were involved in. So what would a just recovery from the pandemic look like? Our organization provided a bit of backbone support to that organizing, getting things written down and a website built. And one of the things that came out of that just recovery organizing was a lot of interest in basic income. And so a network of community organizations formed Basic Income NL. So I think that's one thing that's different about Basic Income NL as an organizing group compared with some other areas, is it's mostly paid staff. It's mostly EDs and CEOs and stuff of community organizations from a pretty wide range of disciplines who all see that basic income would be the most transformative possible policy for them. So there's youth organizations, mental health folks, anti-poverty folks, women's organizations, food organizations, all there. And I think that coalition building format has been really effective because individually, each of our organizations have a fair bit of access to decision makers. We also have things like paid communications people. We have research capacity. We have some things we can bring to this that are harder to do in a purely grassroots way. And I think that has helped move the needle a little bit. So one of the things we did, for example, you see the picture of that report on this screen, is we actually just, we wrote our own policy paper and reached out to Harvey Stevens, who'd done the early costing for PEI, and just paid him to update his model with our data, because we had a bit of money that we could do that. And we were able to table with the province the first cost estimates of what basic income would cost in the province. And that just started a bit of a process moving with our provincial government. So I think being able to reach out and do government's work for them a little bit helped, because then a committee formed internally to deal with what we just dropped on their desks, right? That's been an effective thing. The other effective piece we've seen is that basic income here has been included in Indigenous-led advocacy in Newfoundland and Labrador. So there's a Indigenous policy coalition here that is prioritizing basic income quite strongly. And that has helped move the needle. And the final thing I'll say is just that in a small province, and I think there are other small provinces on this call, take advantage of the media environment, right? Like, we have lots of access to our local media, to the public conversation as a community organization in a way that you wouldn't in Ontario or British Columbia, maybe. And the basic income movement has really been able to leverage that. And I think that's been part of the reasons we got where we are. So hopefully that provides a little bit of kind of worked examples of some of the concepts that Tracy and Sheila were talking about, and shows maybe one of many paths that we can walk forward on this. I'll stop there and we can dive into the rest of the conversation. So thanks, folks.
Thanks, Josh. And I think you laid the groundwork so well on understanding the unique social and political context, navigating it, understanding the assets that you have in your province, and building the response around basic income based on that. It's one of the reasons why we are so focused on community solutions, community understanding of poverty reduction in different places. And so Keitha, finally, out in the Yukon, you've been doing a lot of research too about what basic income would look like, and connecting it to the local poverty reduction strategy, which also deals with housing and health, et cetera. So can you tell us a little bit about like what you've been finding, and how that supports the local poverty reduction strategy?
Thanks, Natasha. And yes, I think building on that similar idea of the unique context in each of the different regions. So I just want to share a little bit about our organization and what poverty can look like in the Yukon, some of the unique challenges and opportunities that we face. So I'm a project coordinator with the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition, and our coalition has been around since 1996, and we're committed to facilitating the elimination of poverty in the Yukon through awareness, education, research, advocacy, community building, and action. And we currently have more than 600 individuals, non-governmental agencies, politicians, and representatives from the business and faith community as part of YAPC and our work. And Josh, just like you, we do believe in the power of more people sitting together to help advocate for a cause, especially in small communities. For anyone who's been to the Yukon or seen videos or photos, you know that it is a very beautiful place, but it also has one of the highest costs of living in Canada, a poverty rate that is above the provincial average, and current social supports that are not meeting the needs of Yukoners. Many people face financial insecurities here, especially in First Nations and rural communities. So like I said earlier, we want to talk a little bit about what the contributing factors of poverty are here, who is most affected by income insecurity, and how basic income could help address these challenges. The Yukon has the 4th highest cost of living in Canada. It's very substantial here, and many Yukoners can't afford the basics. A couple of examples, more than 21% of Yukoners experience food insecurity, which is one of the highest rates in Canada. And in 2021, more than 2,100 Yukoners were in core housing need. And all these are some of the reasons why our Putting People First report that was released in 2020 recommended exploring a basic income pilot to test how a guaranteed income could improve well-being in our communities. Poverty is not spread out equally in the territory, and it does affect some groups disproportionately. For example, individuals living alone represent 30% of those in poverty in the Yukon, despite making up only 14% of our total population. The median income for Indigenous First Nations people in the Yukon was just over 50,000 compared to just over 68,000 for non-First Nations people. And rural communities like Ross Rivers have poverty rates that are 4 times higher than the capital in Whitehorse. As you can see by those kind of statistics, existing approaches aren't working for our community. And things that many people rely on in the Yukon, minimum wage, social assistance to help alleviate poverty, they were designed to provide temporary financial relief and protection. They were never structured to sustain long-term financial stability. For example, social assistance for a single individual in 2023, in the Yukon, they received an amount of just over 22,000, which is 29% below the MBMN poverty line. As well as there's also the systemic barriers of trying to get off of SA, the welfare wall, and the month-to-month administrative process that can be burdensome, undignified, and inefficient. The Yukon minimum wage also is only set at $17.59 an hour, which means that a full-time minimum wage worker in Whitehorse earns 13% less than the poverty line. Another situation that is challenging up here is just the lack of coordination for social supports. SA, for example, in the Yukon is distributed by the Yukon government, by self-governing First Nations, and by the federal government. And while they provide the same core income, there are significant differences in discretionary funding and other supports, which can lead to discretionary or inconsistent care across the different providers. There's also no central database for reporting or eligibility or funding structure, which when we were doing this research around basic income also makes it difficult to assess gaps and impacts. And all of this just really highlights the need for alternative solutions that ensure long-term financial stability in the territory. At YAPC, we really feel strongly about the potential benefits of basic income for the territory. For example, if BIG replaced income assistance, it would significantly lower administrative costs. Our research shows the potential for less strain on social services such as healthcare, food banks, and it would provide better opportunities, employment opportunities, and as I mentioned, help alleviate the welfare wall by a more graduated income decrease. I included the photo of myself as a musician in the webinar. And as I mentioned, I used to coordinate an Artists in the School program, and a basic income would give artists an income floor that would allow them to, for example, go and teach more music and visual art workshops in communities without having to rely on inconsistent funding to support those programs often. So it has lots of widespread benefits in our community, especially rural communities. And we also think that it's good for our local economy because people in the Yukon who have more money are going to spend it locally. So it also is a benefit to local businesses. This kind of gives a quick overview of a snapshot of poverty, some of the contributing factors, why some of the systems aren't working. And we also just wanted to share a little bit about where we're at in the territory. In 2024, YAPC worked with the Yukon government to create a background research report on basic income. And we also created an options paper that has gone forward to the Yukon government for consideration. And although our research has identified potential models and approaches for implementing a basic income in the Yukon, our primary recommendation at this stage is not to adopt a specific course of action, but rather to conduct further collaborative research to fully understand the program's benefit for the Yukon. Basic income has been on the radar in the Yukon for a really long time. We are excited to be able to do this research with the Yukon government this past year to start to dive into that more fully. But there is some more work to be done to fully understand the benefits for the Yukon. Next steps include next steps from our perspective include doing a further cost analysis on implementing the basic income guarantee, including more detailed breakdown for the different regions in the Yukon, because the regional differences do make significant impact given our diverse and big geography here. We want to assess BIG's impact on federal and territorial benefits, as well as its interaction with the tax system, analyze the social and economic impact, including how BIG would interact with the housing market and existing housing subsidies up here, and continue consultations with Yukon First Nations to ensure that Indigenous self-determination is respected in the program design, as well as develop an evaluation framework that can meaningfully measure the impact of basic income on employment, health, housing, and financial stability in the Yukon. As I said, we really think and are excited about the potential of basic income for our territory. Our small population provides really strong potential to be able to deliver basic income that could meaningfully impact our whole community and streamline access to adequate financial supports for our residents. And we want to ensure that the potential of BIG in the North remains on the radar of advocacy communities and our politicians. So I just want to say it's really been great to be able to be here today to share some of the information about the Yukon and to hear what's happening in other parts of the territory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keitha. Thank you, Tracy and Sheila, for giving us that big picture around a basic income guarantee, some really concrete strategies, tools, and resources to be able to use. And Josh and Keitha, we so appreciate that like on the ground information about how you're looking to adapt basic income within your specific contexts and sharing how you're leveraging basic income to address challenges with different systems and just the research that you're continuing to do. We really, really appreciate it. I'm sorry, folks, that we've run a little bit over time, so we don't have time for questions, but we have answered a couple in the Q&A chat box there, and we will be sending out all of the links, tools, and resources, and please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions as well. We're going to be sending a follow-up email shortly with the recording, the slides, and all of these links and resources, so you can respond to that if you need to. We have a couple of upcoming webinars and workshops around building a strategy for belonging across Canada and about using community futures, using the future in collaborative change making. So we'll send those links as well. And last but not least, we want to share about an upcoming basic income guarantee conference. It's the Advocating Canada Towards a Basic Income Guarantee conference happening in PEI, and we will share the registration link in the chat as well. They're also, I think, still accepting calls for proposals at the moment, so have a look at that too. And yes, thank you again to all of our speakers, and I hope folks who joined were able to take some really amazing strategies away, because I know I did. Thank you, everyone.